I believe our Federal Reserve is either outright lying to us or being completely misled in what's going on in our economy. And I want to give you a prediction for what he's going to say and the two evils he's looking right in the eye. But first, we have to know what they're doing and why it's wrong, because they have a mandate for two items: keep unemployment low and keep prices stable for you and I. How do they measure that? They measure unemployment via the Bureau and Labor of Statistics and the CPI index. The CPI index is a cumulative, I think it's 8,000 different prices that they're monitoring that falls into one index that they then say, okay, inflation is 2%, 3%, 4%. Now, if you're wondering how did they get to 2%, 3%, 4%, it's based off what the prices were last year. So if they say food is up 4%, it's 4% more expensive than it was last year. Now let's move over to the unemployment. We're going to talk about both these real quick, but let's go to unemployment. How did they get the data? When they say 4% of America is unemployed, and they say this is a very good number, that's low, that's considered maximum employment. How did they get it? Do you know? Are you aware? Are you privy? Let me privy you. They get it via making 80,000 phone calls to different households, sometimes only measuring a minimum of 60,000 that they have to make. So anywhere between 60 and 50,000 phone calls are made to heads of households to measure unemployed individuals. How do they define unemployed? Well, they define unemployed as someone who is not working and hasn't been actively working for 4 weeks. They also measure in non-responses, because if they were to be calling a household and they don't get an answer, they have to get something they can put on the paper. So what they do when they're contacting their 60,000 minimum, 80,000 preferred households in a month to ask, hey, how's the American life going? You got a job? If somebody's not answering the call, i.e. anybody under the age of 35, they get to do this thing called, and this is from their website, the BLS's website, they use something called statistical imputation. Statistical imputation. This is a fancy word for they guess based off historical data. So they get to take last month's report or the quarter before that or the year before that and go back and say, oh, well, they said this last time. Let's just pencil this in. So it's not real time. They're also not contacting anybody in unemployment offices. They're not connected with any businesses, any APIs that could be synced up to have data on wages. They have no data on layoffs real time. They're not contacting anybody in the unemployment realm or businesses. All they're doing is calling houses. By the way, that first stat I read you, if unemployed, if not working and not actively looking for 28 days, if somebody's been looking for a job for upwards of 4 weeks and then they stopped, they're no longer considered unemployed. If they haven't been looking for upwards of 4 weeks, they're no longer considered unemployed. So someone that's super unemployed, no longer counted as unemployed. Layoffs aren't tracked, no companies, no HR systems. Unemployment number is just BS. It's just BS. It's lagged, it's late. And let's look at other data. Let's look at joblessness rates. Let's look at the U6. Let's look at the underemployed segment of America, which some are saying is upwards of 25% of Americans are considered underemployed. They don't make enough money to be economically even viable in America, or they're working part-time because full-time's not an option for them. They're gig economying themselves to death because they can't get by on their just one full-time job anymore. So we're not tracking joblessness. We're not tracking seasonal work. We're not tracking corporate bankruptcies, credit card delinquencies, household savings being at all-time lows. We're not tracking any of that. We're just tracking one unemployment number that is getting us lagged data. And we're making trillions of dollars worth of decisions off of listening to this man talk about it for 30 minutes once a month. Let's look at CPI. Core inflation, like I said, it's gathered by about 8,000 different prices being monitored, brought into one section, and then they say, hey, out of all of these, how much more or less expensive are they than this time last year? So anytime you're hearing 3%, 2%, 4%, they're saying since last year. But did you know that that number builds on itself? It compounds. That every single time that number goes up, it's building on a new, bigger number. The cumulative inflation for housing is up 47% since 2020. But if I were to actually go into the core inflation index, it only measures shelters going up 32% since 2020, which I thought was odd. So I started to look into how do they actually get their housing data? And you would think they're using Zillow, they're using Redfin, they're using the MLS. They're doing something to actually measure and monitor closings and median sales prices in some way, shape, or form, right? No. what they're doing is they're doing this thing called an owner equivalent rent price. 33% of CPI is shelter. Hear me, it's weighted. So shelter is one of the most important numbers in the entire CPI index. And when I looked at it, I said, that's about 15% lower than any number I've seen, 33%, since 2020. Most are 47, 50, 60%. Some say rents have doubled in their areas. Okay, power in their index says it's gone from 100 to about 134, $150. Most people think it's gone from about 100 to about 225 in the last 5 years. So is this data even legitimate? Housing is using this owner equivalent rent. What is that? Once again, phone call. Hey, what do you do if you had to rent your home out? Is the question they'll ask the person on the phone. They'll say, if you had to rent your home out, what could you rent it for per month? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, 2,000? Done. I'll write that down. And they take that number. They get all the answers together, average them together. Is that higher or lower than it was this time last year? They're basing this off of mom and pa, grandma, grandpa, and I'm sorry, as a real estate professional, people that don't know what their home could actually rent for. Lagged data. People have no clue what they could get an accepted lease for. That's what they're using to get shelter costs. They're only up 32% in 5 years. Don't freak out. Because it's not real data. The unemployment data is lagged and bad. The unemployment for core is lagged and not even knowledgeably based. And that's just housing. They do something similar for almost every single one of the metrics. So the main two things that you are meeting on and talking on for 30 minutes, they're just moving trillions of dollars once a month. Jerome Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, you're basing it off your two mandates to keep employment at stable levels, maximum employment, and to keep prices stabilized for consumers. And the two data points you're anchoring your conversation on are lagged and bad. I'm neither red nor blue, but no wonder Trump keeps yelling for you to be fired, replaced. Drop rates now before things get bad. I'm not saying that's the option. I think both of y'all should get in a meeting room, by the way. Did you know over the last 5 months that they have not met once? No executive private meeting between the Federal Reserve and the White House, Congress, lawmakers, nothing. Not a phone call, not a Zoom meeting, not a Google call. Don't go get ice cream. Do something. Schedule a meeting. We are walking to a pivotal moment in our economy where we're looking two evils in the eye. You know what the two evils are? Stagflation and a broken lever. What's a broken lever? I only have 2 minutes, so let me be very quick. When the Fed rate moves up or down, the Fed controls a rate. When that goes up or down, it manipulates, maneuvers the sentiment of investors. And what that does is it maneuvers our bond market. And the 10-year treasury yield, one of those bonds, is how we get mortgage rates. When mortgage rates are high, it's usually because the 10-year treasury yield is high every single time. You can look at the Fed rate, the 10-year, and the 30-year mortgage rate, and they all move in sequence, except for right now. The rates are starting to go up all while the Fed has gone like this. There's a chance that the lever the Federal Reserve has of moving this rate that ultimately affects rates for you and I breaks, and they no longer have control, and international investor sentiment leads the way. And that's not good when the debt is high, the deficit is growing, and the dollar is weakening. The 3 Ds. And then 2 is stagflation. Stagflation is a humongous evil that happened to us once in the late 70s. Extremely high rates in Reaganomics were the only thing that pulled us out of it. Stagflation is stagnant wages from unemployment, underemployment, and inflation that persists. See, a world where everything gets more expensive, all while less people have less jobs, is a terrible scenario for an economy, and one the Federal Reserve does not have the tools to be able to fight. So in a world where one of their tools may be getting weaker, and the economy we're walking into isn't one that they can really fix if it were to happen, stagflation, and yet every single month we're meeting on 2 pieces of data that are lagged and bad to tell us about what's going on in the economy that moves trillions of dollars worth of our economy worldwide, and we only do it once a month. We don't communicate with the executive branch or the lawmakers, and we expect somehow our economy is going to continue to thrive. Our Federal Reserve knows what's happening. They're looking it in the eye, and they're choosing to pretend they don't see it and not tell us.